the Detroit Lions season autopsy. What happened? What killed the season for the Detroit Lions, if you will? So coming in, the Lions, of course, on the heels of a 15-win regular season, and this was a team that was dominant. Looked like overall, top to bottom, probably the best team in the NFL last season. But unfortunately, defensive injuries starting to pile up, and the kind of cracks were starting to show, and it all just imploded, facing off against a hot Washington Commanders team in the second round of the playoffs after getting a bye in the first round, which, myself and a lot of people believe that the bye week actually hurt this Lions team more than helped. Kind of, A, stop some of their momentum. B, I think, allowing Ben Johnson to take some interviews during that time. It was kind of clear in that playoff game he pretty much had one foot out the door. Less than 48 hours after that game ended, he signed as the head coach of the Chicago Bears. So he absolutely was, interviewing and meeting with other teams during that week. So, yeah, I think, unfortunately, just kind of crumbling right at the end of what was otherwise a tremendous season for this Detroit Lions. So coming into this season, with a lot of expectations to stay a force, stay a contender in the NFC. Now, one of the biggest concerns was the schedule. We knew it was going to be a lot more difficult. A lot of tough games, specifically on the road. A lot of teams that, at the time at least, were also considered to be contending teams. Of course, we'll talk about the specific schedule in a moment. But other concerns, new coordinators, unproven coordinators as well. You got John Morton as the offensive coordinator and Kelvin Shepard as the defensive coordinator. And then on top of that, with the retirement of Frank Ragnow specifically, what was the offensive line going to look like? You have, a couple holes there to try to plug after the offensive line was elite the year before for the Lions, that 15-2 regular season. So those were some of the things that this team was kind of jumbling with going into the year. On top of that, a much tougher division. Everybody, expected Chicago to at least take a step forward. I didn't expect them to take that much of a step forward. Obviously, they took a big step forward. I think their schedule played a little bit more of a role in that than how they actually played. The Packers, everybody expected to take a big step forward, especially fresh off the signing of Micah Parsons, which obviously he ended up getting hurt for the season. And I don't think the Packers really played up to their true potential, if that makes sense. Obviously, they're in the playoffs. They could get hot, who knows? But in terms of the regular season, they just did not look like the team that they were really cracked up to be. And then the Vikings didn't really know where to place them. Obviously had a solid team last year, but with a rookie quarterback, what was this team going to look like? So I think we all expected, just from that standpoint, we did not expect a 15-win season again for the Detroit Lions, given some of those factors. But I think everybody still expected this team to be a playoff team. And going into the regular season, lost the first game of the season against the Packers, which, in my opinion, I think, again, the Lions did come out pretty flat in that one. I think they finished the game somewhat strong, but I think the Packers just came out with their A game. The Lions sweeping the season series last year, and, of course, the Packers coming in on the momentum, the hype of being Super Bowl contenders in the NFC, and the Micah Parsons signing. I think the Packers, especially in the first half, played their A++ game and handed the Lions the first loss of the season. Going into week 2, what do we expect with this Ben Johnson Bears team coming in? They were defeated in their first game of the season against the Vikings. The Lions come in, and the offense finally gets going. They explode 52 points, 52-21 win over Ben Johnson's Chicago Bears. Good stuff. Week 3, starting to feel pretty good about this team. Able to get a huge road win at that time against the Baltimore Ravens. Again, they were considered a AFC contender going into this season. And that was a place that's very tough to play, specifically for this Lions team. They got completely blown out a few years ago playing against the Ravens on the road. That was a big win at that time. Going against the Cleveland Browns, which at that time they had Joe Flacco as their starting quarterback, and that offense for the Browns just absolutely miserable. Pretty effortless win for the Detroit Lions in that one. and then the Bengals as well after that to win their 4th game in a row. The Lions looking really solid. I mean, defensively, not the best game. You know, the Bengals kind of making it somewhat a little bit closer for comfort for the second half, but I mean, still a pretty effortless win there against the Bengals, who, without Joe Burrow, they were awful this season. And then the kind of cracks started to show after that, starting week 6 against the Kansas City Chiefs. I know the officials were pretty awful in this game, and of course, the first drive of the game, that trick play, Montgomery passed to Jared Goff for the touchdown that was called back due to a silly technicality, in my opinion. And the weird, they got the call from New York or something. Some weird stuff right off the gates, but I still think the Lions didn't play good enough to win that game. And then after that, against the Buccaneers, the offense, I think, really took a turn for the worse in this game. It was just brutal. We started to see the big flaws with John Morton, which were kind of creeping up the past few weeks, but they did play some, easier teams leading up to that. We got a lot of the, forcing the square peg in the round hole with John Morton offensively in his play calling. But the defense really standing tall against, at that time, a red-hot Buccaneers offense. And the Lions getting a big win going into the bye week, 24-9. At that time, going into the bye week, the Lions were 5-2 and looking pretty solid in the NFC. But coming out of the bye week, man, something was off. Something was really off with this team. They lose to the Vikings, 27-24. In every facet, they basically beat themselves. Just horrible penalties. They, were not converting 3rd and 4th downs. Bad turnovers. Just everything that could go wrong went wrong for the Lions, and most of it was self-inflicted. And the Lions lose. And that was like, okay. We knew with this schedule, with how tough the rest of the season is schedule-wise, really not much room for error the rest of the way. That's a pretty bad loss, but that's really all this team can really, afford to give up if they want to try to make it back into the playoffs. Week 10, at the Commanders, they bounced back 44-22. That game was notable for Dan Campbell taking over the play-calling responsibilities over John Morton. And the offense got back to looking a little bit more fluid, although the Commanders are a pretty bad team, so we'll see how they look against a good defense. Well, yikes. Week 11, 16-9 loss against the Eagles. There were opportunities in this game, but this was an example, I think, Dan Campbell getting way too aggressive on 4th downs, and the Eagles kind of knew it was coming. Now, granted, I was really impressed with the Lions' defense in this game, but the offense just, man, they had so many opportunities in this game, they just could not capitalize. So, tough loss for the Lions, but of course the Eagles, defending Super Bowl champions, very good team, not necessarily a bad loss on paper. Followed that up with a bad win, in my opinion, if there was such a thing. 34-27, needing overtime to beat the New York Giants, one of the worst teams in the NFL this season. And I was just not happy, even though the Lions got the win. This should not have been a close game. The Giants are just absolutely terrible. And, it's just, just to have a bad feeling. Even though the Lions won, it's like I'm not happy with how they played. Really not happy how this is kind of turning up for the rest of the season. Week 13, Green Bay Packers on Thanksgiving, losing that one 31-24. And kind of like the Eagles game 2 weeks prior, I think the Lions definitely had chances in this one. Some pretty bad lapses defensively, resulting in big plays for the Packers that they got some scores on. I think the Lions, that's another game that they should have won. But again, tough team on paper. But man, that's one I know the team definitely would like to have back. Bouncing back, week 14, I thought was a pretty complete performance by the team. One of the few of the season overall in all 3 phases, offense, defense, and special teams. 44-30, taking down the Cowboys. Even though they gave up 30 points defensively, Cowboys were red hot offensively going into that game. One of the best offenses in the entire NFL going into that game. Week 15, another loss. The whole second half of the season, win one, lose one, win one, lose one, back and forth, back and forth. They follow that up with another loss, 41-34, close one. Very exciting game against the Rams. And the Lions I think they played a great game, but they needed to play almost like perfect if they wanted to beat the Rams. They were able to force a few turnovers and just a bad third quarter offensively, really overall. That was kind of the difference maker in that one. The Lions played a great first half, and if they just did not fall flat in that third quarter, I think the Lions could have gotten a big win there against the LA Rams. But then after that, horrific back-to-back games, completely winnable games. Steelers 29-24. Took way too long for the offense to get going. Of course, a lot of people made a big deal about the last play of the game, the officiating or whatever. Lions didn't deserve to win that game, straight up. I mean, they just didn't play good. You know, it shouldn't have to come down to the last play and a bad call. So, you know, that's unacceptable. I thought that should have been actually a blowout, multi-score win for the Lions, but they end up losing. And then, of course, worst game of the season by far, Christmas Day, 23-10 loss against the Vikings, against Max Brosmer, who was just atrocious as a third-string quarterback. They couldn't do anything in the air. And the Lions, kind of like the first meeting with the Vikings, continually shot themselves in the foot time and time again, and they really beat themselves in this one. And at that point, officially eliminated from the postseason, going into the last game of the regular season, 19-16, getting the win against the Chicago Bears, which, you know, able to snap that 3-game winning streak. You stop a Chicago team that's got a lot of momentum, and the Lions, you know, kind of playing well in all three facets, kind of like that Cowboys game. Very few instances this season where, in fact, the Lions played good in all three phases. So that's kind of the game-by-game prognosis with the Lions. They could have easily made it into the playoffs if you win really either of the Steelers and Vikings games. In my opinion, they should have won both. Despite all the problems with this team this year, they still should have made it into the playoffs. They have no one but themselves to blame. But that said, I just think wasn't really confident in this team's ability to make a deep run in the playoffs, if you will. I mean, look at the games against other playoff teams. Of course, they did go 2-0 against the Bears. They were 0-2 against the Green Bay Packers. Besides that, they lost to the Eagles, lost to the Rams. You know, some of these other playoff teams, some of these other tough playoff teams that they, you know, potentially would have been playing in the first round of the playoffs, had things shaken out differently. I just was not really comfortable with this team going in. And that was just some of those things that we kind of feared going into the season did come to fruition. I was pleasantly surprised with Kelvin Shepard. I thought, especially earlier in the season when the team was healthy, and even that last game against the Bears, I was actually happy with Kelvin Shepard as the defensive coordinator. I thought this team did a lot better of mostly weathering the injuries, although those last couple of games, you know, Steelers, Vikings, the Rams and such, like, you know, some pretty bad defensive performances in there, and I think mostly due to injuries. Whole secondary was wiped out. I mean, you got like third-string safeties in there, cornerbacks, like, you know, at a point it just kind of boiled over in that point. But I do like Kelvin Shepard. I'm glad he's sticking around for next season. I'm glad who's not coming back for next season, though, John Morton. He has been fired, and I think deservedly so. I think the writing was on the wall once Dan Campbell took over for the play calling. I mean, this guy was just awful. I mean, again, forcing the square peg in the round hole, just not a winning strategy. This team, you know, needs a little bit more diversity in terms of the play calling with, you know, the play variety and, you know, stick with what works. John Morton was consistently calling plays that were proven to really not be working with this team based on the team that they were playing against a given week. Just was not working. And Dan Campbell, you know, a buddy told me this in the middle of the season. I'm, you know, apt to agree. Dan Campbell was better at calling plays than John Morton, but Dan Campbell should not be the one calling plays. I'm sorry. I mean, he's got too many other plays he's spinning at that time. You know, I didn't think he should have been the one calling plays. So I do agree with the firing of John Morton. Get a guy in there who can actually handle the play calling responsibilities and hopefully get this team offensively back on the right foot. But they can't do that until they patch the holes in the offensive line, which for the most part, I mean, was like not horrible on paper in terms of the personnel there. Of course, you got Penei Sewell, one of the best tackles in the game. Taylor Decker, which there's some mumblings that he might retire in the offseason. We'll have to wait and see. Tate Ratledge, I'm hopeful this guy can improve, but I was not totally displeased with this guy for his rookie season, selected by the Lions in the second round in the last NFL draft. And then Graham Glasgow missed a couple games with injury, but I thought this guy was pretty solid as well. And then Christian Mahogany, he missed 6 games. And I think with some of those injuries, you got a rotating cast with that kind of 5th spot on the offensive line. And just with that, it's amazing just one guy being kind of rotating in and out, how much of a difference that makes on the offensive line. And it really showed as the season wore along in those last couple of games. On top of that, at tight end as well, with Sam Laporta going down with a season-ending injury halfway through the season, that definitely hurt the Lions in terms of blocking schemes as well. And Jared Goff, I liked him this season. He was great, arguably one of his best seasons in his career and with the Detroit Lions. But just from the standpoint of he needs to have that solid blocking to be effective. He's not a scrambler, and you can't put him in positions where he needs to make faster throws before the play develops. And, if he gets sacked a couple times, he loses his effectiveness. He rushes his throws. That's when he's not effective. But, again, I like Jared Goff this season. And just the rest of the offensive makeup, offensive core, Jahmyr Gibbs, terrific. Amon-Ra St. Brown, we saw the development of Jamison Williams be a solid number 2 option. I think we're going to see an increased role for Isaac Tesla moving forward. Had a lot of great plays down the stretch as well. And then, besides that, defensively, I actually like where the defense is at full health. That's the big thing, is the defensive injuries were a killer again. I mean, DJ Reed missing a lot of time. I mean, Kirby Joseph, that was a huge injury. Only played 6 games this season. And he was the interceptions leader the year before. I mean, that's a big loss for this team. Terrion Arnold missing a lot of time with injury. Brian Branch ended up missing the last couple of games with a season-ending injury. So, again, there's a ton of talent on this Detroit Lions team. I don't think there really needs to be any drastic changes with this Lions team, quite frankly. I think patching up, getting another solid guy on the offensive line. Of course, if Taylor Decker ends up retiring, that's going to be another conversation in itself. But if they can find another guy on the interior of that offensive line, I think the offensive line will be good to go. Defensively, if they can stay healthy, I like this defense. And then we'll see who this Lions team hires as the new offensive coordinator. And I don't think there needs to be too many drastic changes with this team going into next year. Again, 9-8. This is the 4th winning season in a row for the Lions, which, I mean, the last time that happened was, it's been decades since that's happened with this team. So, even though they missed the playoffs, feels disappointing from that aspect, but, I'll absolutely, take it in the long run, the grand scheme of things, playing the long game here. And it's amazing that we're now trained to expect greatness from this Lions team because that's how good they've been the last couple of years, specifically the last 2 years. And, I think this Lions team still has some quality football ahead of them in the years to come, even though they missed the playoffs this season. This was a win-win in the last week of the regular season. They tied with Minnesota winning both games. They get last place. So not only did the Lions get a winning record, but they finished last place and they get a 4th-place schedule for next season. So look at this, the schedule for next season outside of the division. At home, they've got New Orleans, Tampa, New England, New York Jets, Tennessee, New York Giants. On the road, they got Atlanta, Buffalo, Carolina, Miami, Arizona. I don't know about you, but I see at least 12 wins in that group. Obviously, the Lions need to play much better in the division. I mean, obviously, if they won both games like they should have against Minnesota, they, could have had a 4-2 record in the division as opposed to 2-4. But regardless, we knew it was going to be a drop-off from the 6-0 division performance from the year before. But I think with a easier schedule next year, combined with just some minor tweaks here and there with this roster, nothing drastic, I would welcome another great pass rusher opposite to Aiden Hutchinson. I think that would, be a boost as well, kind of make him a little bit more effective, but make some tweaks, get an offensive coordinator that can actually call plays effectively, and I think this Lions team can make another run next year, even though they kind of absorb a little bit of a down year this year. And I think we should be good for 2026 for this Detroit Lions team, even though they missed the playoffs for this season. Even if they made the playoffs, I wasn't really confident in their ability to make a deep run anyway, considering all the factors with the injuries and such.
If you missed today's installment of On the Docket, podcast it at foxsports1019.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to tune in live weekdays at noon on Jackson's Fox Sports 101.9 FM.